you find that I'm talking too fast, you need me to slow down, you can always give me, like, I live in Topanga in the mountains, and sometimes people drive crazy here, and I'm like, well, you're going around crazy curves, and we go like this, slow down. So if you need me to slow down, you can just kind of go like this, and I can come more to another way of speaking. But it is my total delight to be with you today. My name is Leah Lamb, and I am a sacred storyteller. And it took me a long time to be able to say those words. I didn't understand how long the journey would be. And a little bit of my journey that brought me here is, honestly, I was born on a farm in Vermont, and getting to be with the seasons and getting to be with the land and to live in a time when kids were allowed to go outside and run free and wild and be like, come back when it gets dark. And even if it got dark, they knew that we were just somewhere close by, hanging out in the barn with the goats, that allowed me to cultivate a kind of imagination and a freedom with my imagination that I think that was a real gift. I didn't realize what a gift it was at that time. And I began to learn the responsibility of storytelling when I was older, and I came across one of the greatest grief thresholds of my life when a dear friend of mine died, and I didn't know how to make sense of it. And so I came to this place that had been my sanctuary for my whole life, which was reading and books and stories. They had gotten me through so many challenges and had rescued me through so many times when I didn't want to be in the world. And now when there was this place when I truly didn't know how to be in the world, I had this place where I could go, which was writing. That play that I wrote to process that grief ended up getting in a playwriting festival, and it brought me into the professional world of theater. And I was invited to work at a very young age in professional theater companies. And I came into the business of storytelling. So I learned the responsibility that what you put out into the world will come back. What you put out into the world comes back. If you put out stories of joy come back. The expression of joy comes back. You put out stories of grief, you activate grief in other people, so their stories of grief will come back. And it really taught me the responsibility that we have as storytellers. I learned the business of storytelling because my parents gave me another incredible gift. And when it came to college, and I wanted to go to every most expensive college in the world for acting, they looked at me and they said, don't waste your time and our money if all you want to do is study acting. Go to an acting school to study acting, not a big college. So I did. I went straight to New York City. I studied with Stanford Meisner at the neighborhood playhouse, and I got to soak up all of off-Broadway and Broadway. I got to work off-Broadway, worked at summer stock, and I realized very soon I had no interest in the business of that kind of world. But I discovered something, that there is something so palpable and so magical, and I really felt it as magical. I could feel this energy of connection happening between us as creators and between the audience. And I wanted to understand how to focalize that energy. I wanted to use it for good. I didn't want it just to walk out the door, at a time when everyone's saying the world needs help. If we're going to generate that much energy together, I wanted it to go towards something great. So long story short, I end up going to college. I meet the cool boys, and the cool boys were studying wilderness leadership, and I wanted to go hang out with them. And so, because I'd been around a lot of gay boys, and I love gay boys, but I was a young woman and I wanted to follow the cool boys, and they were all doing wilderness leadership. And so I followed them, and it followed me into this path of working with youth at risk in the wilderness. And I had come back to another home of myself, and that's where I learned the power of wilderness and the power of wilderness as a healer. And that people could find things within themselves when they came into relationship with nature that they couldn't find in relationship to other humans. And they could find something in relationship to the desert. They could find something in relationship to the fire and what it is to be a true guide. And it was really in that place that I began to learn, what is it to be a guide versus a leader? And that would eventually lead me down this continued path of how do we bring healing to this planet? And at first I thought I had to go save the planet. I don't know if you guys were told that when you were young, go save the planet, right? You're like, oh my God, that's so ridiculous. Planet's gonna be fine. It's our relationship with her that's at risk, and as I got older, I was like, I don't think we can save the planet if we can't save ourselves. Now I replace the word healing. I don't think we can bring healing and restoration to the disconnection on the earth if we don't know how to do it with ourselves and with others. And so that question took me into the world of getting a master's in social work and really learning about greater systems and about healing through humans. I eventually had my own massive crisis threshold, which was with cancer, and they told me I could lose my voice. It's an amazing story. I tell it sometimes. And I realized that once I had the gift, like then it became a gift, because, they say you don't know what you have until it's taken away. I didn't know that having a voice was a gift. And also being a woman in the United States, understanding the responsibility of how to use something that you have that not everyone gets free access to. And that began to just wake me up even more to the initiation of what it is to be on my own life path. And I started an organization called the Performance Initiative, which was all about utilizing the arts for social change. And I would say the next few decades was about weaving this passion for love of earth, love of humans, and love of the arts and creativity, and this place that I knew as sanctuary and joy and pleasure and delight, which was storytelling. I eventually ended up working for Al Gore and produced and hosted the Green Channel and got to work in the center of media. And what I saw there was that news and information was not where change was happening. And I was committed to being a part of transformational healing and change. And it gave me my golden ticket to the place where the genius lives through me. And I don't mean genius like as an egotistical way. I mean like in the old Roman ways, when you had a birthday, they would celebrate the genius in you, that spirit that you allowed to live through you. That's what they celebrated. And we all have the genius that lives through us, whether it's through yoga and healing or storytelling. And so this is the place where I was like, this is where the field of delight and connection lights up the most in my world. I ended up starting a school for sacred storytelling completely by accident. It was totally by accident. I had called for the prayer for how was I to show up. A huge story showed up. I ended up committing a decade of my life to writing a novel. And I wouldn't wish writing a novel on my worst enemy. I really do think it can be a curse to have to write a novel. It takes the level of commitment and dedication and learning as a whole other ball of wax. But in relationship to that, I began to understand what I've now come to understand is, what does it mean to be a sacred storyteller? And I'm going to give away part of the class today. It's about this connection of earth and spirit, as if you can't see it, but the connection of earth and spirit, and us being able to be unique channels where we align these energies. We give them energy through the pulse of our heart. We give them resonance and a way to live among us through our voice and our song. And all of a sudden, we are a vehicle, we are a vessel for this alchemy living among us. And to me, that's a very distinct way of being in relationship to story, to understand that we are in many ways a portal for these other energies to speak and walk among us in the world. You get to take all of this and you get to listen and you get to find the resonance that lives in you. This is the fun of doing this. I now approach story very much as a mystic, and I do a mystical form of storytelling where I can tell you guys more about that. And now we live in the realm of sacred storytelling. And let's get into the material. That's what brings me to you today. So I'm going to start with a quote. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. And they tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen. And too often, stories of will saddle us, and they'll ride us, and they'll whip us onward, and they'll tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. I like to pause here. I love this quote, but I'm not so fond of this language of we. And I learned this from one of my teachers, Stephen Jenkinson, who makes a strong stand for not using the word we, because I don't know what your story is. Maybe you have you've got the most amazing evolved consciousness of all time, and stories don't run you at all. So maybe this quote doesn't apply to you. So I just want to give credit to where credit's due. We don't know where we all come from and where our perspectives are, but I like what she's saying in this. So what she goes on to say is the task of learning to be free requires learning to hear those stories, to question those stories, to pause and hear silence, to name those stories, and then become a storyteller. And that quote's by Rebecca Solnit. And I really value her take on the process of coming to the threshold of storyteller. You got to be able to see the stories. You got to be able to know that you can see them so that you can make conscious choice about whether or not you want to carry them and whether or not you want to give your precious life to that story. And then you get to be a storyteller. And if you want to, put into the thresholds, when I say that, I'm going to put it, I'll just put it right here in the chat box. This is a great moment to pause and reflect together, and I'm going to ask you to put this in the chat box. You know what? It's not going to let me copy this. It's smarter than I am today. Sorry, guys. The quote goes, we tell stories. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories saddle us, ride us, and whip us onward. They tell us what to do. And sometimes we do it without questioning. And I'm going to ask you to think about this right now. Are there stories that have got you by the tail? Could it be the story of betrayal, the story of scarcity, the story of there's not enough, the story of shame, the story of doubt, the story of the judge, just start wondering, and if you want to enrich our conversation and put something in the chat box, I think anytime someone is able to share their awareness, it helps all of us come on their own awareness. The rest of the quote goes, the task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. And I'll just make a plug for that pause and hear silence, giving yourself time to really listen. And Wendy's saying, the story, I won't have what I need, right? I will have to fight for what I need. Ooh, that's a good one. What would you replace that story with? It's like trust. I will have the function, right, deliver unsupported, right, so okay. These are great, so great when we can get our hands on the story of you're not enough, the story of you're enough. Hold on, Emily, I'm sorry. I don't know if you meant to put not enough, but the story of you're enough. Andrea's coming in, not enough, shame, doubt, being unworthy, of scarcity, of lack, of not making it on my own, right, of not knowing what to do, says Anastasia. Right, Emily, was you're not enough. I know that story. Ooh, the story of abandonment, says Kate. Ah, great. So let's take all those stories and let's put them into our cauldron, as if we're sitting here and there's a cauldron in the center, a sacred fire. Let's put ourselves circled around the sacred fire and we can place all those stories there, or if you're more comfortable, we can alchemize them. We can do that. Or if you want to feel more comfortable, we can imagine that there's an altar between us. And we take these stories and just for the next hour, you don't have to let go of them. You might not be ready yet. There's nothing wrong about that. So, but you can I invite you to place those stories onto the altar and see if you can't just allow some time for them to settle out and be there. And what's always nice is when you empty the vessel, be like, well, what story do I want to bring on? The story of shame, doubt, being unworthy, of scarcity. I'm reading this because I think this is a very familiar story, of lack, and so you really get to see what are the stories that you want to call forth. And in Greek mythology, they personified all the energies. They understood that the energies took form. Okay. And so the one of the ones that we've been playing with another group is the energy of joy, and it's the goddess of hedonism. And so what is it to become a devotee to joy? This energetic that says, oh, well, why don't you come play with me for a little while? And what if joy starts to replace doubt and shame? You got to do your work to get through doubt and shame. That's beautiful stuff. So I don't want to be fluffy over here. I don't want to pretend that this doesn't take a lot of work and a lot of courage, because it does. Really truly alchemizing these energies and really truly releasing them takes real live courage. But this happens through the way that we use our voice. This happens through the way that we tell our stories, and it happens through the way that we live our stories. And it happens through our commitment to what stories we want to keep carrying. So let's kind of get into some of the most oldest ancient understandings and wisdom teachings around language. And these are some of my favorite pieces. The Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or to set it into motion. If you ever haven't had an opportunity to watch the hula, not the Elvis Presley movie version, but like real live, like hula, which is an embodied prayer, spoken like, but it's incredible. What a great transmission. It's still alive and happening right now. Sicilians believe that words can poke holes in the universe. I always think about that when I get my temperature, I'm an Aries moon, my temperature can raise pretty fast. And I really got to watch the mouth when the temperature raises, because what you say can never be taken back. And I think the Sicilians really had a little something on that. The Australians say the stories of the past need to be sung to the present so that the future can exist. What wisdom, like we have to know where we're from to understand ourselves in context of the great story. I love this because right now there's so many people being like, everything's horrible, everything's bad, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's a miracle. Do you understand that? Like, we've never had this many people living next to each other that have had this many worldviews ever. It's incredible, wild time on planet Earth. We have to understand in reference to context that people have been making great journeys to be with each other from across the globe and have left their main family systems, their main tribes, where they all share the same belief system and the whole same values and the same ways of seeing the world. Now we're all living together. It's many stories living together at once. Tyson Yokamura talks about, who's an Australian original, talks about how there's a practice where all the different tribes would come together and they would look at the moon and they would tell all their different stories about the moon. And how, a good story can live next to another story, as compared to a bad story, which can't coexist next to another story that's different from it. These old ways of looking at stories and mythology, I feel like, give us all the same key aspects of wisdom in terms of how do we understand what's trustworthy in our times. And boy, are we being put to the test. Holy cow. So there's a great piece right there. Is this story trustworthy? This is a good story. Can it coexist can it coexist with another one that sees the world from another perspective? Or does it try to fight to destroy it? The Maoris say that the words don't describe a thing, that the words are a thing. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I love that. I'm going to say it one more time. Because if you don't feel the miracle of being a human on this earth and what unique gift we were offered to give to these times, I'm going to say it again. All the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. So I really invite you to think about, what stories are you telling about our future? What stories are you telling about what's, because each word that you speak, sorry, my internet seems to be going in and out. Each word that you speak is creating the pathway to that place. And we do that with our language. We do that with our imagination. And we do that through this incredible aspect of being able to determine how we use our words. Do we speak our words to amplify our fears, or do we commit ourselves to the prayer of what we're calling for? It's a different kind of using our language while holding the same things in our beingness. I'm not saying turn a blind eye. I'm not saying don't speak up to things that are unjust, but I'm saying, what are you saying more of yes to versus what are you giving more power to by resisting? Anyway, that's a whole other class. We're not going to get too into it, but something in you is inspiring this kind of wild off-track conversation that I'm going into today. So thank you. And Lucy, I'm seeing what you're saying over there too, right? The story of shame and pain, and my sister who didn't recover from her trauma and so chose suicide. And that, Lucy, that is a really powerful story to be living with, and one that is, we're going to come back and talk about how do we tend to these really traumatic events that live with us, and it's really worthy. So I'll do that. So thank you for inspiring that part. I'm gonna read you one little poem here. It was translated from the Inuit by Edward Field. It's called Magic Words. In the very earliest time, when both people and animals lived on Earth, a person could become an animal if he wanted to, and an animal could become a human being. And sometimes they were people and sometimes animals, and there was no difference. All spoke the same language. That was the time when words were like magic. The human mind had mysterious powers. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It would suddenly come alive. What people wanted to happen could happen. All you had to do was say it. Nobody could explain this. That's just the way it was. What a great journey to wonder, how did we lose our way with words? That'd be such a fun story for somebody to write. But I just love this miracle of life. Abracadabra. It's a word from ancient Aramaic mysticism. I create as I speak. So let's jump into this. What is a story? What brings us here to get today? What is it? What do you think of when you hear story? And there's no wrong answer. You can put this in the chat box, or you can say it out loud. What is this thing? And this is one of those opportunities also to like play the game of eloquence. And the way that I was taught about eloquence was that it's not about being fanciful with your language or clever. It's about trust. And it's about feeling that impulse of life that wants to come through you, wants to speak through you, and allowing yourself to open your voice, take a nice deep breath, and allow it to come through. So that's how I learned about what eloquence is. So there's no wrong answer right here. It's like whatever you say, it's just going to feed our conversation. So I'm getting answers over here. Anastasia is saying it's inspiration and imagination. Hi, Anastasia. Gosh, I love that. And so the question is about what is a story? That's what the question that we're working with. And so, right, it's inspired. I don't know the etymology. I can't believe I don't know the etymology of inspire. If anyone does, that would be a fun one. But it's like imagination. Talk about the last frontier. We don't know where it's from. We can go out into space, we can go out to the deepest part of the oceans, but we don't actually know how to source it. Like, you can't bottle up imagination, right? And it's kind of this amazing thing. So it's where do these stories come from? It's such a great wondering. Sean Kane talks about myths, and beautiful book, Wisdom of the Myth Teller. And he talks about that myths are the earth speaking out loud. So what is coming out of your imagination? I always love asking that because I can hear them a lot. Andrea is saying stories are life, right? What I know stories of is I also know them as love. I have never come to the threshold of telling a story and not fallen in love with the people who I've told it to. And I've never heard someone's story who I haven't fallen in love with, and that it is an act of love to give a story because it takes something. You're giving your life to somebody. Albertina is saying stories equals touching the heart, right? So that there's something that happens, we can feel there's a resonance that happens. And I want to speak to that resonance because, it can be beautiful and it can be heart, but it can also be around fear, or it can be around untrustworthiness. And so when we start feeling a lot of resonance with a story, I've heard some stories that I'm like, excuse my language, I was like, that's just batshit crazy, So my logical brain is going, that's batshit crazy, but my body starts freaking out because it's a scary story, because there's fear that lives in me. So this whole piece about that we touch each other, we're touching each other all the time through our story, through the power of our resonance and the ends like that. Okay, Andrea's also talking about connection. So there's this thing about stories. There's that magic that I talked about, it's like, there is this magical thing. Watch, you want to go on a journey? Let's go on a journey. Once upon a time, in a land not so long ago, in a land not so far away, deep at the bottom of the ocean was this beautiful tree, so huge that the very tippy tops came out of the surface of the ocean. But under the ocean, she was like this great big Christmas tree with these beautiful glowing red apples, golden apples that would just float and bubble in the ocean as she swayed. And what was resting In the bow of her great arms were mermaids and dolphins and elves. Somehow they were living at the bottom of the ocean in this great big tree. Okay. How many of you saw that image? Okay. So you see the image. So what did we do? We just location traveled, we reality bended, we time traveled, we did all these things. And we did it with the freedom of our own imagination. We didn't need VR. We didn't need AI. I mean, this little box helped us. Thank you, Zoom. Thank you, Internet. But the right side of my brain, it's like magical what we just did. We just co-created reality together. That's amazing. If one of you was an artist or a painter, you might bring that into physical form and paint it. If one of you is a sculptor, you might sculpt it, and all of a sudden it's there in physical form living among us. And so what I'm calling magical, Princeton calls neural coupling. And the right lobe of my brain, when I start creating that image, whatever I'm creating, and I called for an image to tell you guys, this wild thing comes into shape and form, and I give it my voice, the right lobe of my brain gets super activated and goes deet, 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 and the right lobe of your brain gets super activated, deet, 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 and we start co-creating this reality together. It's magic. It's wild. It's incredible what humans can do. So yes, it creates a lot of connection. Kate saying that stories share the threads of existence, which have universal wisdom, and sharing those for the good of all. Yes, I love that you're talking about the universality. John Steinbeck says, you cannot tell a story will not last if it's not about the reader. Okay, that means that when I come to the threshold as a sacred storyteller, and I want to tell you a story, that by that point, it's no longer mine. It's your story. It's our story. It's the universal human experience. So it's not a narcissistic act. There are different ways of telling stories, and there's different reasons why we come to a story, and there's different journeys along the healing. And we're going to talk about working with story and healing. But what I'm talking about right now is this distinction of when you say, I'm coming to the threshold as sacred storyteller, which means that now I'm taking my step on the path of elder, which means that I know that in my life, I have a gift to give that's going to go way beyond me. Because where stories are crazy magical, and interesting that they're a gift. Yeah, they don't follow the laws of entropy, which everything else on our planet does. Cars will break down, horses the houses will fall apart. Everything's going to break down. Even the statues from Greece will eventually, they'll eventually, break down. But we have stories among us that are over 4,000 years old. That's insane. So it's like the stories that you tell, God only knows, or goddess, or, whoever, only knows how long they're going to be carried past your life. I carry stories. I have no idea where they came from. Not a clue, but they're still feeding and nourishing me, and that we can do that for each other. We can say, my life is of such value. This is not narcissistic conversation. This is like humaning 101. That together we grow together, and it's through our collective consciousness joining and growing from each other that this happens. And so when we come forward understanding the true value of our life, and that it's worth sharing, that is a gift, and that wisdom that you're carrying is going to save me years of pain, because why should I have to relive your accident if you already learned from it? So that means that we got to learn from our mistakes, that there's actual real value, and not staying stuck. But that when we go through and I don't like the word mistake. You know why? Because it's like it has a negative association, and I don't know how you live a full life without getting in and out of alignment. It's like think of it like a fish, it's going back and forth, and so it's like things are going to happen, and you're going to step out of alignment, and there's going to be a really big ouch, and it's going to suck, and it might be embarrassing, and you might be ashamed, and there might be all this stuff that comes out in you. But wow, that means that you're living your life, and you're not living by yourself, hidden away in the closet, not daring to live or make a mistake. So when you make a great mistake, make those mistakes, because you're going to learn from them, and then you're going to come out with a really great wisdom story, and you're going to help those all around you not have to make the same mistake. So aren't you the queen of the day? So it's like this is what it means to be a storyteller, and to understand the gift of your life and living it so fully. I had an acting teacher one time. He said, make the mistake so big, you got to wipe them off the wall. He was talking about acting, but I think it's a great, claim to like live fully. So Zoe is saying that a story is a pocket of mysterious fun. Well, that's fun. I love that. And there's mystery. I want to talk about the role of mystery, because in a lot of Western style storytelling, we've killed mystery. There's no space for mystery at the table. We want a beginning, a middle, and end, and we want to know how everything works out. And when I started reading Indigenous stories, specifically from the Laguna tribe, it just broke my brain, all of them, because the structure and the way of being was so far different than the kind of story structure that I'd been raised with, being a product of Disney and Hollywood, which wanted to tell me life is perfectly safe and secure, and how everything works out in the end. The Laguna stories, they were like, these things would happen and mystery was at the table, and they weren't always explainable. And it shook my little system, and it said not everything can be understood or explained. So I love this talk about, inviting mystery into our storytelling, because what do we do as storytellers? The Welsh word, which I can't even pretend to say because I will destroy the word, because it's like, 18 syllables. But the Welsh word for storyteller is guide between the worlds. And so we can be this guide between the worlds, and we can guide people into their consciousness and back. And we can be with them to say, yes, let's go to the darkest places. We'll bring you back. Let's understand that mystery is a part of life and give you the resilience to live through it. Why did so many people go crazy during COVID? Because we didn't know what was going to happen. We don't have that resiliency of being with mystery. It's not put into our storytelling, and we are made of stories. So at least that's part of my take. I'm sure there's many different perspectives on that. Here's another fun thing. Truth. What is true? A true is carpentry term. It means a straight line from you to me. Okay, that means that my truth is what I can see. That means that you can be sitting over here and have another truth, and they can coexist and both be right, because we both see different things. It's great. I love truth. So let's not get stuck in facts and information. Stories are breath of life into what's present, yet remains unseen until spoken into being, says Wendy. Right, there's a word in Japanese called kotodama, which speaks about the spirit of a word. I love that. Lucy is saying, understanding how the other person feels to have such a different life from you, leading the reader who is intrigued to be more empathetic. So Lucy, I love this piece. And there's all this research about they've done all this proven research about how when you come into TV, sorry, Diana, you wrote me a private note that it should be done through email and not in the middle of a class. It's really distracting. And I understand that you have this question, but I also want that to be honored. And
I have emailed many times, so
okay. We'll deal with it, but this was really not the right moment for that. And I appreciate that you're not getting the answer that you want. Okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted. It's easy for me to get distracted. So, Diana, I treasure you. I just want you to know that. I treasure you and all that you bring to all these spaces. So in terms of coming back to, that it can create empathy, that they did this research with television shows, and they did it specifically around sexual identity and sexual identity acceptance. And they took a group of people who stated that they had no acceptance of people who had different sexual identities as their own. And then they started to show them different TV shows of people with transgender reality who were gay. And they got to see these stories, not about these people, but got to hear the stories through the voice and perspective of these people. And all of a sudden, when they could do that, they had another way of being in relationship to them. And so after one time they had a slightly different perspective. After 2 different episodes, they'd have more understanding. After 3 episodes, sometimes they had full acceptance. So I'm not saying anything about where people should be in terms of all of this, but in terms of understanding our stories have capacity to give us a window into people's lives that we might never, ever be able to have. Sylvia is saying story is what carries us to the heart and pulse of life, and that makes us human, that carries us to the mystery of the unnameable. Wow, the pulse of life that makes us human. In the climate movement, one of my biggest beefs with our storytelling with this is that we've made data the main character, and we try to pretend that facts and information make a story. Humans don't metabolize numbers. We don't. We make meaning out of story. And there's one other thing I'm going to add about this. I just read this research and I wish I could source it, because I've been listening to so much lately that I don't even know what podcast I got this from. And I was driving. So, I hate that. So if someone knows the source of this, please speak it up. They've done research recently that when the brain goes into a trauma state, when it gets into a state of high stress, where it thinks its survival is at risk, the first thing it does is it starts to make stories. And it tries to make meaning out of it. So this is so great, because think about this. Like, if you can grab this the next time you get really challenged or upset or threatened, and it's hard, right? So maybe tell all your friends, this too, so that you can all help each other. That means that, the guy doesn't call you back. You're like, oh my God, he hates me. He doesn't like me, rather than, he lost his phone, or, you don't hear back from your boss, oh my God, they're firing me. They're planning this, they're planning to oust me, and they that last email they sent to the director, and they're going to fire me when I go back. And well, no, he was just, busy in 3 other meetings, these are great things to be able to understand, that this is outside of your control. The brain, you're wired for this, so when you get into that stress, anxious, survival state, your brain's going to start taking care of you, and it's going to start telling you stories. Okay, so your job as a sacred storyteller is to be able to notice. That's your strongest weapon in these moments. We could call it a tool. Doesn't a tool sound so much nicer than a weapon? But sometimes you got to go to battle with these things, and like make your tool a freaking sword, and like cut yourself free. And I love this this teaching, and I'll have to find this woman, because I just learned about her. I saw one of her classes. She's a medium. But her technique that she used in this moment was, she says, when you start finding and noticing that you're triggered by something, rather than fall down the pit of that story, of doubt, of shame, we've got all of them, right? You can go, isn't that interesting? Isn't that fun? It's like the quickest ticket out of jail. Okay, so I love Tatterhood story. Yes, that's such a great one, Kate. So we're nearing our end of our conversation, and I'll say we've gone wildly off script. Something in you guys inspired just a really fun conversation, and I do want to speak to this to 2 things. What is the distinction of a sacred story? And then I promise to talk about this journey of the storyteller when dealing with traumatic stories. To me, the distinction between a sacred story and a story is that a sacred story, it's in the language. We're calling it sacred. We're saying that there's a divinity that lives within it. There's a life force that lives within it. So a sacred story has a life form, an energetic that we get to come into relationship to when we allow our channel, this body, to be used to receive it. David Bowie used to say he would just put up his antenna on, deep, 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 the songs would come. I love that. It's like, it's like we, and so, right. So with our storytelling, what's happening is that we have this opportunity to come into relationship with sacred stories, and we know them. You guys have been talking about sacred stories. They make us feel good. We feel connected to the heart. We feel access to love. Oh, we can access our grief when we don't really want to. You know, they'll take us to open our hearts to feel grief. You know, they'll show us the darkest parts of society and make us force them, but they'll bring us back and they'll show us how to be better humans. You know, these are great sacred stories. You know, a sacred story when you feel more alive, more at ease, more filled with joy, more filled with life. And gosh darn it, I'm going to get up tomorrow morning extra early and I'm going to exercise and go to the gym and lift all the weights and quit sugar and caffeine while I'm at it. You know, it's like you just feel yes to life. There's something, you get fed and nourished by the goodness, you know, that brings you into your wholeness. The flip side of a sacred story is a zombie story. And these stories are death eaters. And you feel a little empty on the other side. And you feel a little depressed, and maybe all humans should be gone, you know, and you feel fractured, and you want to eat a little more food, you know. Where's the popcorn with the extra butter? You know, it's like that. That's like, give me more chocolate, you know. So it's like, pay attention. What television shows are you watching? How do you feel when you're done? Do you feel enlivened, or do you feel like a little heavier? You know, what movies are you feeding your consciousness? What are your friends? What stories are they telling? And look, I'm not talking about becoming fragile. And, you know, in California, there's all this talk, don't lower my vibe. I don't want to hear your negativity. Well, you know what? It's like everyone's where they are in their own journey. And as sacred storyteller, you get to put on your goggles. I think of it like snorkeling. You know, you put on your goggles and you get to look around and you're like, well, there's a sacred story. Oh, that's nice. You know, oh, there's a zombie story. Okay. You know, you can just let it parade on by. You know, you can just watch the show. And that's what I love about that capacity. So I'm going to talk about now this journey of what do we do when really traumatic things happen. I don't know why Zoom is just going in and out today, but here we are. So how do we work with story as a healing tool? So let's say something really traumatic happens. Okay. And life happened to us. We got initiated. And what I'm going to call initiated is like when life isn't going to be on the same, life won't be the same after this ever. You know, and we all go through them. No one gets out. Nobody gets out without being initiated by life. You know, and it can come through a broken heart. It can come through losing your job. It can come through the change of a massive relationship. It can come through a health crisis. If you're living on earth, you get to go through initiations. It's like what leads us through the different aspects of growing up in life. And, you know, in other cultures, they would formally recognize them and you would have this aspect to be witnessed and to be held and to all of it. We don't have that as much anymore, you know. But we're getting better. You know, it's coming back on board. We're remembering and we're making more and more place for it. So a really traumatic event happens. The first thing that can be done is to have a witnessing circle. Now, witnessing circle is a group of people who really, really love you and are really on your side. This is not a bunch of people. This is like a couple of people, like 4 at the most. It could just be one other person. And you say, can you please witness the story? Don't ask questions. Don't ask for more information. Don't dig deeper. None of that. That's not what this is. That's information gathering. Okay. What you're doing is you're doing a listening circle. And if you can do it around a fire, isn't that delicious? You know how good it feels to make a fire. Totally inconvenient sometimes, but God, it feels so good to sit around a fire and tell a story and to give it over, you know, to speak your story into the fire. What is fire? It's transforming. It is it literally changes form. It's happening right in front of you and you get to call on the energy. That first one is just listen to me. Don't ask me questions. I'm not trying to be politically right. I'm not trying to be the right person or good or anything. This is how it's living through me in this moment and for it to be able to be witnessed. Then there comes a moment when you're like, okay, I don't want to be stuck in that. And there's this great TED talk by this fellow that he talked at the Charlottesville TEDx. And he tells a story about how I think his legs were broken when he was a kid. And his mother had this brilliant wisdom. She said, you will never tell this story in the same way. Every time you tell it, you're going to have to tell it differently. What great mom wisdom. Because who we are when it happened, that stays the same, but who we are now will change. Like trees, every tree will grow. Humans grow. Our stories should be allowed to grow. So go look. If there's any story that you're still telling the same way, get really suspicious, because your neurons, your brain might just be stuck on repeat. So get out of the racetrack and let the story grow up as you are growing up. And so now you're not the same person anymore. So how did we get there? How do we get to the alchemy, to the wisdom that's living in the story? So one thing you can do is you can take that story and you can throw it out into the mythic dimension. And this is, to me, is one of the most magical, wild, mysterious things that you could possibly do. And what happens there is that now you can be in relationship to the spirit of the story that's being lived through you. Now we're looking at what's the universal story. It's not yours anymore. Okay, you've given it up. You've handed it over. So in order to do this kind of storytelling, you also have to not be right. If you are right and righteous, and you know this story, and you know how wrong they are, no matter what, you can't do this. You're not ready yet. Okay, so that's okay. You're going to have to be patient with your timing. You throw it out and you ask for the symbolic expression. How am I showing up symbolically? How is the other person showing up symbolically? And then what's the landscape? And you let the story speak back to you and tell you its story. So that it's not you repeating the story through two animals. It's you listening and allowing the story to show you another way that this is showing up in metaphorical form in the spiritual dimension, in the mythic dimension. Michael Meade says that behind this dimension is a mythic dimension. Okay, so as we do that, what's happening is that now we're letting the story speak to us and tell us its story. You go to France, you learn French. You go to Spain, you learn Spanish. You want to go to the land of story, you're going to have to learn its language, which is symbol, myth, metaphor. So let that story speak back to you. And all of a sudden, you have a wild new perspective. All of a sudden, you've got all different kinds of wisdom. You can ask for it. Show me the gift that you're giving me through this. You can do all these questions. What's the soul lesson? Allow the soul lesson to start speaking to you. Really allow yourself out of the nightmare that you might be in, stuck in watching it play out in human form. So you're going to that. Then you bring it back and you receive that story. Okay. Now, as you come back and start to shape it and change it into a wisdom story, now you're into a whole other ball of wax. And you're looking to tell the universal threads, the story. What was the archetypal energy that you were in before? What was the part of you that was dreaming yourself into being? You've always wanted to be, that came alive through this. What strengths and new powers did you have to engage by meeting this moment? There's a tsunami wrestler move. This is my favorite storyteller move. That person that's the villain in your story, that person that's the bad guy. You go, oh, you're my master teacher. What you got for me? What did you come to teach me that no one else is willing to? Okay. So now you're in another conversation and you're out of the petty tit for tat. Well, I said this and you said this, and you're in a much greater opportunity and you're much more empowered. And talk about being the author of your story. You're playing a bigger game because you just made your story really big. And now it's the story of your soul. So that's one way of working with a story. And so when we're talking about something really traumatic like this, with suicide in particular, it's a matter of being able to, there's no way to make it pretty or easy. And so why should we pretend, but there might be gems that are in your story in terms of what it took to live through it, what it took to claim your life when someone else chose not to live beside you. There are pieces in your story that want to emerge. And so I'll keep asking, yourself, who are you now? How have you been changed by this experience? And you keep asking that in this universal thread. You are not the only one that's dealt with this. And it's like, I stand beside you. Not my sister, but someone very, very dear to me. And so there's this universality, and as more of us who've gone through these, especially stories that have a lot of shame embedded around them, you know, it's like the braver we can be to meet them and to share them, the greater the gift, because there's so many others that are silenced by these kinds of stories and how to live through them. So this is why I say telling stories is an act of love. It takes love to tell your stories. That is our class for today. I'm going to stay on a couple more moments, and I'm going to talk about ways that we can play together in terms of courses that I have that are coming up. And then, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll end with a quote. And Lucy, I'm seeing your question. So the difference between the feminine version of the hero's journey. Okay, I'm going to give this one thing because it's a really great thing. And you know who talks about this? Oh gosh, my memory is just like, it's just a beast these days. I can see his face. It's this beautiful man from Nigeria. Maybe it'll come to me if I stop forgetting, if I stop thinking about it. But anyway, he's a story. Bayo Akafat. Yes. Anyway, he's incredible if you don't know about him. And he talks about this thing and about how dangerous the hero's journey is. And it forces this patriarchal perspective on us. It takes it so that the enemy, in order to discover your gift that you bring back to society, right? We're all obsessed. We want to bring our gift out, right? And that's in this story model, you got to go out, you got to find a monster. You have to find a monster, you've got to slay it. And then that's how you get to discover your gifts, and then you bring it back, right? Well, that puts us on a journey of having to be finding and making people monsters so that we can kill them and reward ourselves, right? No. The feminine version is to go inside the cave. That you go within. That you go within to discover the true gifts. That you go into the void. That you go into the mysteries. So they're very different story models, so that you can play with that. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Sylvia, for putting Bayo's information there. Okay, so here we go. He has a great talk, and we'll be putting it on my podcast very, very soon. And he also teaches amazing classes. Now I'm going to tell you about some amazing classes, School for Sacred Storytelling. We have one coming up. It starts next Tuesday, and it's called Cantadora. And this is the last class. I've been teaching now online for 7 years, and I am going to be moving along and doing other things. I'm so excited. But the School for Sacred Storytelling is going to remain. This is the last class that I'm going to teach, and I'm doing something I've never done before, which I'm really excited about. I got inspired by the times. So this class is called Cantadora, and it's all about, sorry, I'm trying to pull up the link for you. That's what I'm doing over here. It's all about carrying old stories. So as a storyteller, I love to geek out on this class because everybody gets to come with their very own story. You know, sometimes if you've always wanted to learn a story from your own lineage, this is a great, I don't know what's going on with Zoom today. But if you've always wanted to learn stories from your own lineage, if you wanted to learn how to carry a folk story or anything like that, this is an opportunity for you to do it. It's the only class that we teach like this. Something else that happens in this class, where the thing about carrying old stories, and especially now, is this awareness of some of those old stories, they don't deserve to walk among us. They've got old bits of consciousness that are ready to be shifted. And so this is an opportunity for us to, you get to really meet this exactly where you want to, meaning that if you are someone who just wants to learn how to carry an old story, then you can do that in this class. And if you're someone that says, you know what, I want to be more creative, and I want to take Cinderella, and I want to fix all the places where the old patriarchal perspectives are in there, and I want to tell another version, you can do that in this class. This is a kind of pick your own adventure. So we're meeting on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. They're recorded, but we get to participate live. We'll never talk this much ever again in those classes. They're very, very interactive. And what else would I say about that? You get to work with a small group, which is really fun. So you don't just work in class, but you also have an extra group if you want to outside of class. You get a lot of practice time. After teaching this, it's like what we've learned is that some of those groups, they just stay together. They found their creative tribe and they stay together way past class goes. Another benefit of being in this class for a month is that you get 1 free month of membership to the School for Sacred Storytelling. And in that, you get a lot of bonus classes. So you get, thank you, Diana, also Wisdom Keeper. With the School for Sacred Storytelling, you also get an extra writing class. So on Thursdays at 9 a.m., we meet for a free writing class. We have a book reading class, which we read right now, the 13 original clan mothers. And it's just, we just read 1 chapter a month, and it's according to the month that we're in. And it gives specific wisdom about what's going on. It's such fun. And it's just a really fun way to be with an ancient old story and ancient old wisdom, and just read a little bit each month and come together and talk about it. And then we also you get exclusive access to coming as a live participant to my podcast interviews. So on Thursdays at 11 a.m., I do interviews with some amazing people. And as people who are in the membership or in classes, they get to come live and participate. So that's a fun thing also. And I think that's it. So that's Cantadora. And if you're feeling the call and you're like, yes, I'm in, what I would say is like, hop on board, because for those of you who register in the next 24 hours, I'm also giving a bonus gift of, you'll also receive, I'm going to give you the study on your own class. So that could be any study on your own class that you want. So you get, it's another 4-week class. So essentially you get 2 classes for the price of one that happens live and one that is pre-recorded. So we'll give you, if you want to do that, when you get your class, you'll get an email from Farron, and she'll tell you what what classes you can pick from. I'm trying to remember wisdom stories, that class I just walked you through is an evergreen class. I don't know or not, but if it is, then you can choose that one. The other thing is that I have a retreat coming up, and this is where I'm moving more of my energy towards more in-person things. And so I'll be doing in-person workshops in Topanga more and more. And we have a retreat coming up in Crete, and it's next month, and we still have some spaces that are still available. So if this is for you, or if you happen to know somebody who you're like, this is exactly what they're calling for, but this is really bringing with story in the oldest of ways and working with story as part of the initiatory process, which I talked about. How do we formally, with ritual and ceremony, let go of the stories, the energies that are really in the way of our fullest thriving, that we learned through surviving? How do we identify all those, do the release, and then really create and embody that being that we've been wanting to be? And so many of us our thresholds haven't been recognized. Whether it's, from puberty into womanhood, or whether it's through marriage, or whether it's coming out with our gifts, or whether it's starting a new business, these are all initiations. And whether it's going into cronehood, or creating the space for our creatrix self, it's an amazing opportunity to really claim that. So that is what is on the skinny. When I stop teaching, what I'm going to say is that the School for Sacred Storytelling is going to have a second life, and we're going to be bringing on a lot more teachers and focusing on just what we talked about, what is sacred storytelling, connection to earth, spirit, and the expression of story. And so we're going to have a lot more storytelling teachers, and also people who can connect you with the spirit realms and the sacred arts realms. And it's going to be a beautiful place. So thank you, Wendy. Always good to be with you. And I'll leave you with a quote. And then if you have questions about anything, I'm going to turn off the recording and I'll stay here to answer any questions. But let's leave this with a quote, because it always feels right. And why do we do this? It's sort of like when I go to a Tai Chi class, which I haven't been to in a very long time, but when I did, we would always bow to the teacher. And when we bow to the teacher, we're not just bowing to that teacher, we're bowing to the teacher's teacher and his teacher's teacher's teacher. And it's just a good practice to honor all those who've come before us. And so that's why I like to begin and end with a quote. It's sort of like that sacred bow. So here's this quote. My cousin Helen, who is in her 90s now, was in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II. She and a bunch of the girls in the ghetto had to do sewing each day. And if you were found with a book, it was an automatic death penalty. She had gotten hold of a copy of Gone with the Wind, and she would take 3 or 4 hours out of her sleeping time each night to read. And then, during the hour or so, when they were sewing the next day, she would tell them all the story. These girls were risking certain death for a story. And when she told me that story herself, it actually made what I do feel more important. Because giving people stories is not a luxury. It's actually one of the things that you live and die for. That quote is by Neil Gaiman. Okay, so inviting you all to take yourselves off mute and say goodbye. And I'll hang out for a minute.